Hi, this is DrClyde. This is step 6 of 6 of the metabolic method, filling metabolic gaps that are holding back your metabolic flow. So in this step, we're going to sketch out everything that we've learned from all 4 courses, including this one: metabolic nutrition, sports nutrition, metabolic exercise, and now the metabolic model. So what is that metabolic model? So from a movement perspective, activity breaks throughout the day is the most important. A maximum voluntary contraction for 10 seconds pulls all of your muscle fibers out of the super relaxed state and keeps them idling for as long as an hour. Now, if you're not going to go to a maximum voluntary contraction, move for a minute or 2. Longer than 3 minutes, unlikely to pull any more muscle fibers out of the super relaxed state to keep your muscles idling, as long as it's moving around at a pretty good clip. Some light strengthening movements, a brisk walk, going up and down some stairs at a moderate pace, right? So longer than 3 minutes. What's more important is the frequency. So every hour, or at the very least every 2 or 3 hours. But research shows that if you're doing it every half hour, or even every 15 minutes, then there's an improvement in benefits, which then plateaus at that point. But it doesn't actually have to be an activity break. You can just activate your muscles. Some of my students call it the DrClyde clenching technique, without even getting out of your chair or without moving around from your standing position, as long as there's an increased activation of those muscle fibers. From an endurance perspective, the increase in demand for fat burning within muscle comes from intensities of movement that you cannot maintain for longer than 3 minutes and really peaks with a 1-minute effort. The 10-minute pace, or an intensity you can't easily maintain longer than 10 minutes with perfect form, that optimizes oxygen delivery and therefore fat use. So it gives you your maximum adaptation to the delivery and use of fats. That's your VO2 max pace, maximum volumetric flow rate of oxygen. Your 1-hour pace is your threshold pace, whether you want to call it lactate, anaerobic, ventilatory threshold, doesn't matter. They all occur at the same intensity. I think of it as an autonomic or fight or flight response threshold. That's your 1-hour pace, where you increase your adaptation compared to a lower intensity. But what's best for your cardiovascular system and longevity and health span is lower intensities that you can do longer than 1 hour. So these higher intensities are when you want to turn a corner on your metabolism. You don't want to just be healthy and live as long as possible. You want to undo some of the damage that you've already done. And with strength training, the highest adaptation is going to come from maximizing your power. So that's at a relatively high resistance, done at normal cadence, 1001, 1002, normal cadence of movement. That's functional training or an athletic style of training where you're getting stronger in a way that matches movements that you would do in everyday life, so that you can turn the clock back on your natural genetic potential of strength and your ability to maintain that strength over time. Now, if you're going to a higher resistance where the movement, especially towards the end of a set, inherently tends to get slower, that maximizes your force, not your total work output. And if you're doing a higher repetition and with lower resistance, then that is training your muscles to increase their efficiency in the use of fuel. So a muscular endurance. So again, it's with sprints or high intensity training with cardiovascular type movements, that increases the fat burning demand in muscle. So it's high intensity training that might look like a cardiovascular type movement, and the strength training intensities that all collectively increase the demand. But activity breaks or low intensity movement throughout the day keeps your muscles idling, which also increases the demand. And notice that there's a common element for all 3 aspects of movement, that an activity break longer than 3 minutes, it really starts to become a workout or an exercise break, as opposed to just muscle activation. And with an endurance movement, less than 3 minutes is what gives you the increased demand within muscle. And with strengthening, less than 3 minutes really focuses on the strength component, as opposed to when you're doing sets that are longer than 3 minutes, it starts to include cardiovascular health. So activity breaks don't need to be longer than 3 minutes. And if you want to increase the demand with high intensity training or a sprint type movement, even if it's walking briskly, then 3 minutes would be your upper limit. And for getting stronger, 3 minutes would be your upper limit. So now with respect to nutrition, you want to check the boxes of having some minimal, steady flow of protein and slow carb fuel into your bloodstream throughout the day, even if it's not nearly enough calories, to just give your brain something to detect so that it doesn't stimulate a cortisol release to break down your muscle mass. And you can use vegetables to slow down a carbohydrate that might otherwise be digesting too fast. But veggies and unsaturated fats oxidize quickly so that the antioxidants and the unsaturated fats in those foods, really, they can be damaged the fastest, particularly at high temperature cooking, or if they're processed into powders, which obviously are oxidized. So that's where food quality becomes the most important. And how to put this all together? You first want to defend your metabolic rate. You don't want things to get worse. You want to stop the fall. And the way to do that is with macronutrient flow, keeping a steady hydration, a steady blood protein level, and a steady blood sugar. Don't ever go through the roller coaster spike that drops you down to less than if you'd eaten nothing. That's what happens with fruit juice, soda, candy, processed carbs, baked goods, chips, with all of that. Don't eat those things by themselves, and keep their portions in moderation, meaning don't eat them when you're hungry. And even if you are eating them when they're hungry, where you would overeat them, eat them with other things to slow down how fast they digest. Activity breaks gives you a layer of defense against low metabolism, and having enough hours to sleep. But if you want to nourish your body, to have metabolic health, not just to stop the fall, stop the bleeding, stop the slippery slope, but to get healthier, then you think about the quality of your food, which is the most important with fats and vegetables. And you'll add an endurance component where your heart rate is going up for at least 10 minutes at a time. And you'll think about your sleep quality, which is very responsive to what you're doing in the hours before sleep. It's not just going to be about how many hours did you sleep and did you have a protein or not. You're going to start thinking about the quality of your food, elevating your heart rate for not just 3 minutes, but at least 10 minutes at a time, and the quality of your sleep. And then if you want to drive it all the way into metabolic wellness, then you don't just cut out carbs half the time or slow down the carbs. You stay in moderation with carbohydrate and eat things that slow them down so that you have a steady blood flow, so that your brain leaves the rest of your body alone, and to drive the vitality of the cells throughout your body. And you include a little bit of strength training and intervene with stress management techniques, whatever works the best for you personally. See the last video in this course on that topic. So then, how do you prioritize your changes based on that? So this is the final component or perspective on the metabolic method, is discovering your non-negotiables, a term that I got from my friend Rana Modir, a clinical dietitian at Stanford. Once you've gone through all 4 courses, I'm sure there's a few things going through your mind on what might be some metabolic gaps that you have. Maybe there's as many as a half dozen, which is why I put 6 lines on this chart. So list those from 1 to 6, 1 being the most important, that you think might be the most important. If you're not sure, there's 3 things that might be equally important, then just pick them randomly. Then, on a scale of 1 to 6, which is the hardest, where 6 is the hardest? Now, when you add together how you rank them 1 through 6 on what's likely the most important in terms of impact, may possibly impact your metabolism the most, and then on a 1 to 6 scale where 6 is the hardest, how hard each of these might be to maintain. When you add each of those 2 numbers together in each row, you add A plus B together, then you get a sum where the smallest number in that sum tells you that it's both extremely important because it was ranked higher to number 1 in importance, and that it's doable because it's not particularly hard. So you ranked it closer to 1 in terms of how easy it might be. So if those 2 numbers are the lowest, then the sum is the lowest, and that tells you what to focus on. So for A, B, and C on your metabolic targets, you take the smallest sums in order and ask yourself, what is the barrier to this, and how do you overcome the barrier? And then for the remaining 6, you can do the same thing. But it's generally easier to focus on 3 metabolic changes, or 3 changes in general for anything in our lives, than it is to try to change more than that. So this gives you a sense of what one thing that you need to likely maintain, and then you test it. Now, the interesting end result of all this is that it's overcoming the barriers so that you automatically maintain these changes. That is actually your metabolic program. If you reduce the barriers, like you get all the food for your week, you put your running shoes by the door, you have an alarm that goes off in the evening so you know you're not going to do deadline work on that. Get up in the morning and do deadline work right away so that you're not doing that at midnight, right before you go to bed. Setting the stage, reducing the barriers enables us to easily do the things that are otherwise so hard. So that ends up being your metabolic program. In a deep philosophical way, it's not the changes, it's the reduction of barriers to maintain them easily. Like for me, I keep forgetting to drink water. So I won't eat anything without having a glass of water, not even a snack, not even one bite of anything. That way I know I'm getting water throughout the day because I always want to eat, right? So think about how to reduce the barriers. Putting yellow stickies everywhere, or setting alarms constantly, or monitoring your blood chemistry constantly. This is just going to inundate you with alarms, bells, and just have you spinning in circles as if you have to not only listen to everybody else for advice, but listen to all your yellow stickies and alarms for advice. You want a more natural, personal experience in life. You want your life, you. So tether together things that you love doing together with things that you otherwise wouldn't, like putting on a parachute. If you're going to skydive, you like to skydive, you need the parachute. You like pizza, you need the salad. So if you need sleep, but you like to work late, think about that early in the morning, do deadline work, and then do creative work late in the day. It doesn't mean you can't work up until the moment you go to bed, but do things that don't generate a stress hormone response. And then circle back to this metabolic method every week, every month, every year to reassess what are my goals, where am I, and what might my new metabolic gap be now. So thank you for joining me in this course and in all 4 of the courses, including this one, in the establishing your metabolic flow using the metabolic model.